I've talked a lot on this channel about the Netherlands being a flood-prone country, and the country's ability to manage this issue. But what I haven't talked about is how many floods within the country have actually been man-made. Water is a big part of the country's identity. It's tough to find a piece of its history with water not being a major theme. This, of course, includes war. In southwest Netherlands, in one of the country's most flood-prone provinces called Zeeland, 1/3 of the floods between the year 1500 and 2000 were during warfare. For this video, we are going to look at one specific event that occurred in this region during World War II. Following the Allied success in the Battle of Normandy and the preceding breakout, the Allies pushed east towards Germany. The farther east the Allies pushed, the farther they were from the initial avenues of supply. By the fall of 1944, captured ports on France's coastline had become too far away from the front line. Nevertheless, the focus was on Operation Market Garden, an ambitious Allied plan in the Netherlands to create a 100-kilometer salient into German territory, with a bridgehead over the Rhine River. This would create an invasion route into northern Germany, enabling a takeover of Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. But the operation failed, making the acquisition of a new port even more important. Rotterdam had been destroyed in 1940, making Belgium's Antwerp the largest surviving port in Western Europe, which made it the obvious choice to support an invasion of Germany. With the help of the White Brigade of Belgium's German resistance, Antwerp was successfully liberated by the Allies on the 3rd and 4th of September 1944, just days before Operation Market Garden took place. However, the Germans had heavily fortified the banks of the Scheldt estuary, giving them the ability to block shipments to Antwerp. At the mouth of the western Scheldt is Walcheren Island. Well, it was an island in 1944. Land was later reclaimed. It is now a peninsula and connected to the former island of Zuid-Beveland. This was part of the Atlantic Wall, an extensive system of coastal defenses and fortifications built by Nazi Germany as a defense against an anticipated Allied invasion. Out of this entire defense line, Walcheren Island is considered by many to be the strongest concentration of defenses the Nazis ever constructed. Clearing Walcheren was a necessity. The task to clear the island was given to the 1st Canadian Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Guy Simonds. The planning process began on September 19, 1944. One plan considered was an infantry attack across the island of Zuid-Beveland and a dam that connected it with Walcheren, which would have been combined with an airborne operation on both sides of this connecting causeway. But the Allied airborne units were being utilized in Operation Market Garden. General Simonds came up with another plan: flood the island by destroying its dikes. He believed flooding the island would kill the morale of the German occupiers, would flood German defense infrastructure, and make a consolidated defense impossible. This was possible because most of Walcheren sits below sea level. The rim of Walcheren is higher, made up of a wide zone of high dunes and dikes, and the center of the island is on average just a few feet below sea level, so the flooding of the island would not be deep, but still effective. Much of the island would flood permanently, other parts only during high tide. Only a small portion would stay permanently dry. As the island flooded, the Royal Air Force would then systematically attack day and night to destroy defenses and wear out the garrison by attrition. Amphibious landings would then be conducted, as well as an infantry attack across the Walcheren Causeway. On the 3rd of October, the operation began. Bombshells were first dropped on the sea dike near Westkapelle. This breached the dike and sadly killed 152 civilians. The Royal Air Force had dropped leaflets the day before, warning civilians to evacuate, but they had nowhere to go. Many people sheltered in a windmill, but it was hit directly. Canadian engineers had warned this would not be enough to flood the island, and they were proven to have been correct. Therefore, on the 7th, 100 RAF bombers attacked the Nola dike west of Vlissingen and the dike near Ritum. This was still insufficient, so on the 11th, a dike on the north coast of the island was bombed and breached, followed by a second bombardment of the breach at Westkapelle on the 17th. This would finally prove to be enough. A 1944 New York Times article stated, "Water came in fast, not as a kind of tidal wave that engulfed villages, but rather more snake-like, with the speed and deadly intent of a serpent. The depth of water depends on offshore winds and tide. The average is probably not much more than 3 feet. This figure, however, is doubled at some places. Just as planned, while the island slowly filled with water, the RAF bombed German positions. The infantry attack across the Walcheren causeway started during the night of the 31st of October, but it was quickly blocked. On November 2nd, the German lines were finally broken. By then, amphibious landings near Vlissingen, as well as at Westkapelle, had already begun. On November 5th, the Germans surrendered Middelburg. The last pockets of German resistance on the island were cleared just a few days later. Once the German defenders were no longer a threat, it took another 3 weeks to demine the estuary. The first convoy carrying Allied supplies finally unloaded in Antwerp on the 29th of November. The operation was successful, but the method came with a cost. A German newspaper reported 5,000 civilians drowned, but I suspect this was simply propaganda, as I could not find another source backing the claim. The real number is likely significantly smaller, given how slowly the island flooded. But the livestock were not so lucky. Only 6,000 cows out of a total of 9,800 survived, and 500 horses out of 2,500. The salty seawater caused the otherwise very fertile clay to be completely infertile for years to come. And according to one source, of 19,000 dwellings on the island, 3,700 were destroyed, 7,700 had severe damage, and 3,600 sustained minor damage from the flooding. Some believe if the focus had been on this operation, named Operation Infatuate, and not the failed Market Garden, then the destructive methods would not have been needed. Understandably, many Dutch civilians were not happy. Even if they survived, their homes and livelihoods were likely damaged or completely destroyed. The Dutch government wasn't pleased either. It was never consulted about the operation beforehand. And unfortunately, this wasn't the only place devastated by deliberate flooding during World War II in the Netherlands. The Nazis themselves flooded parts of the Netherlands to slow down the Allied advance. By the spring of 1945, 77,100 hectares in the Netherlands had been submerged by seawater. After the hostilities in Europe ended, the fixing of the dikes and the draining of the island immediately began. But the size of the breaches in the dikes had grown so large that modern earth-moving equipment could not withstand the strength of the tides and the depth of their trenches. New technologies had to be developed. On the 2nd of February 1946, the last breach was finally closed. But this only stopped more water from flowing in. To drain the island, a breach was made in the western levee of the canal through Walcheren. This formed the eastern border of the flooded area. By simply opening the locks at either end of the canal at ebb tide, the bulk of the water mass was drained by mid-December 1945. Pumping stations were able to pump out the remaining water. The island was dry again in early 1946. This video is the beginning of a series on the intentional flooding of the Netherlands during war. In the next videos of this series, we'll take a look at how the Dutch themselves have successfully defended their country from invaders using water. So if this topic was interesting to you, subscribe and hit the notification button to make sure you see new uploads. Also, if you're interested, I sell a few map prints relating to World War II, as well as of Zeeland, on my website at thegeographygeek.com. Shout out to all my Patreon and YouTube members for supporting the channel, and thank you all for watching.